Welcome to the Financial Coaches Podcast, where we talk about how to build your practice from startup to scale up while being the kind of coach your clients crave. Finally, a podcast for financial coaches. Here are your hosts, Maria Casillas and Cody Sizemore.
Hello, and welcome back to the Financial Coaches Podcast. My name is Cody Sizemore, and I'm joined here by my lovely co-host, Maria Casillas. And hate to break it to you guys, but we are going to get into a episode today that is probably going to get me pretty emotional. But before we get into that, I want to just do a little bit of housekeeping and say thank you to all the listeners who are listening to this episode today. But more specifically, I want to also just, kind of call out and thank what we would call the every weekers, which those are the people who listen to this episode literally every week. We've been doing this for, like 2-3 years now. Yeah. I think that we're closing in on like 170 episodes. So if you've been with us for the long haul, and you listen every week, we just want to say thank you. I don't know if I could listen to myself every week. So, hey, thank you. You guys are like the lifeblood of this whole podcast. And you're the reason why we do this still. So, we just want to say thank you for that. And we also want to just draw attention to our Facebook group as well. That Facebook group is growing every week. It's awesome. People are asking really good questions. The engagement's getting up to. So it's just a really good place for, like-minded coaches to be in and to interact and learn from each other. And, of course, keep up on our own updates as well, because we throw in updates from time to time too. So if you want to join that group, if you haven't yet, the group is called The Financial Coaches Community by New Money Habits on Facebook. So just do a quick search, type it in. You'll just, request to join. There's a couple questions to answer to join, nothing too crazy. And then you'll be in and you'll be part of the club. And it's a pretty cool club to be a part of too. So we hope to see you there. With that being said, I want to welcome in my lovely co-host, Maria Casillas. Maria, how you feeling today?
I'm good, but I'm intrigued. What are we going to do to make you cry today?
Well, I'll give you a hint. It has nothing to do with financial coaching on the surface.
Okay.
But then I have a feeling that it will, because there's some ties that we can take from this and talk about.
Okay.
So I'll just start this episode off with just telling a little bit of a story about what's very, very important to me and very near and dear to my heart. And if you're watching this on YouTube, and if you watch every week on YouTube, you'll probably notice that I wear something pretty much every recording, because I pretty much wear this every day at home, every day. And that is my Detroit Lions hat. I am a massive, massive Detroit Lions fan. And for those football fans out there, if you like the Lions, great. I love you. If you're a fan of the Packers, Vikings, or Bears, I'm sorry. We can't be friends. No, I'm just kidding.
I have a feeling we're both going to cry during this episode, but for very different reasons.
Yeah.
So am I hearing you right that we're going to talk football today?
Just a little bit.
Okay.
Just a little bit.
So you're going to have to count on me to find those connections to something else, because I admittedly know very little, if anything, about today's topic. So, okay, let's go for it. Tell us our listeners a story today.
Well, if there's any person that I would feel comfortable drawing parallels, it would be you.
Okay, fair enough.
So I feel very confident in that. But let me just first say this. I'm like a diehard Lions fan. I've been a diehard Lions fan for nearly 20 years. So I have known heartbreak and devastation and suffering for years. It's only the last 2 years that things have been actually really good. Well, 2.5 years kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But, at the time of this recording, this is going to be released probably a month after this happened. But at the time of this recording, we are coming off of a game where we played the Dallas Cowboys in Dallas. And if there's any Lions fans or Cowboys fans listening to this, and they remember what happened last year when those two teams played, you remember that it was full of controversy. The entire country was in uproar about a referee call in the last 15 seconds of the game, which literally stole the game away from the Detroit Lions. And it wasn't just Detroit Lions fans that were up in uproar. It was the entire country. So this meant a lot to us. And I'm happy to report that we ended up beating the Dallas Cowboys this past Sunday, 47-9. It was a butt whooping. It was an embarrassment.
Sounds like a massacre.
For Cowboys fans. Embarrassment. And hey, if you're a Cowboys fan, sorry, but the Detroit Lions are America's team now. I'm just saying. All right. So anyways, I had to get that out. But if you did watch that game, you probably know where I'm going with this. The fact that our star defensive player, Aiden Hutchinson, got a gruesome season-ending leg injury. And it was terrible. I actually sent the video to Maria to watch right before we started recording this. And it was like this guy's leg was like Play-Doh wrapped around a pole. Like it just wrapped around another player's leg, broke his tibia, just completely devastating. And I'm not going to lie, Maria, I'm really, really upset. I'm really upset. It made the win, which was an amazing win. Again, 47-9, we beat the Cowboys. But I found myself after that injury happened to not just the best player on our defense, but arguably one of the best players in the NFL. I found myself really struggling to enjoy the awesomeness of this win as it was happening because that devastating thing happened. So that's how I want to open up this conversation. And I have a feeling that we can tie that in to financial coaching, but I had to talk about it simply just because it's all I've been thinking about for the last 2 days.
Well, I can't say I understand you. I'm not going to pretend to know how you're feeling. I mean, the words that you were using, devastation, heartbreak.
You have no idea how I feel.
Especially with everything else that's going on right now in the real world. It's just like, okay, well, it's hard for me to put myself there, but I'm going to do my best. And I'm going to say I'm really sorry that happened to you. And what was his name? Aiden?
Yeah, Aiden Hutchinson.
Okay.
Hutch for short.
Hutchinson. Okay. But there were some things that I heard that I think we could probably pull out of there and make applicable to not just the people who are like me and completely unaware of, that happened, but also the people who, like you, are aware of it and still want to make sure that they gain some real knowledge and wisdom from this episode. So, one thing I heard a lot of was possessive pronouns. And I want to throw that out there because I think I think you know as well as I do that when we are connected to something, whether that is sports or our clients or something that is completely not ours, if things are going really, really well, we tend to use words like we, our, I, you know where I'm going with that, right? And yet when things aren't so well, the only time what we use that word will sometimes be if we put ourselves in the victim stance, right? So this happened to us, for example. But maybe in the case that you mentioned where, it sounds like the entire country minus myself was up in uproar about that call last year. It sounds like that would be kind of one of those, we got gypped. So we're putting ourselves into that receiving side of the victim side, if you will. But if there was absent that and you're like, they were just playing really badly, it becomes a they. You see how quickly that just it wasn't we were playing badly, it was they were playing badly. So with your permission, I think I would like to unpack that a little bit today, just with regard to how we are that way with clients with their wins and their losses. And then the second thing that I kind of picked up on was you were talking about that is you mentioned that even with almost a massacre happening on the field, it was hard for you to enjoy the rest of the game. The rest of the game, but all of the good emotion that was that was created by that, because of course you were playing on the field, right? You personally, it was
exactly.
your win, but you were actually not able to own that or to enjoy that because of this devastation. I think that's the word that you used, that happened just after halfway through the game.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would like to talk also about how sometimes that happens with our clients. Like, they are clipping along and things are going really, really well. And then something devastating happens in their life or in their financial plan. And it's not the thing that has to end everything for them. Maybe it doesn't end their season the way it did for Mr. Hutchinson, but it actually keeps them from being able to celebrate and enjoy all of the progress that they had made up until that point. So how does that sound for two parallels we can look at today?
I love it, because that was kind of my thinking as well. I promise I didn't just open up this episode to vent about football. I knew that it was going to go somewhere around this, but
but we killed two birds with one stone for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the first one, the ownership.
Yes.
The ownership of the wins and the pushing off of the losses. How do we see clients, not clients, how do we see our listeners and coaches in general doing that with their clients?
Yeah, I mean, like, when things are going really well, like, you know, if a client has a really awesome month or several awesome months, it's very easy to, you know, kind of own that as coaches and just say, hey, like, you know, not only are you doing well, but the plan that we put together is working so well, and all of this kinds of stuff, right? So I think that's really, really easy to do. And, you know, I think that a big reason as to why we do it is because, hey, it feels good. You know, it's a product of our service. You know, at least that's what it seems like on the surface. So it's very easy to take ownership of that and almost to take it away from the client in a way. I don't think that it's something that we do intentionally, but I think that when we tend to say things like, we did this, or the plan that we put together, it does take that win away from the client versus just giving it to them and saying, you did this, you follow through on the plan, and, you know, so on and so forth kind of thing. So that does tend to happen. And I even have to be honest with you, I do that from time to time. I'm trying to do a lot better with that because I've been noticing that. But I'm not perfect by any means. I definitely do that from time to time.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually have written in my initial contracts that, so I do it kind of in a backwards way. Because I want to make sure that they're aware of this phenomena and that I keep myself accountable. Because like you said, I also am very, very far from perfect. And so just kind of laying it out there, I think, is one of those important things. So in my contract, I actually have in there that I'm not going to take responsibility for the things that they're doing. If there's something that goes wrong and they've, you know, been doing what we've talked about, I'm not going to take responsibility for that because it's not my thing. But then I also put in there that the flip side of that is that I'm not going to take credit for when things go right. And so I actually put it right there in writing for them. And I think that's one of those things that we just, as human beings, we, like you said, it's natural that we just kind of want to latch onto the things that are good, but it does disempower our clients. It makes it kind of feel like, well, everything that they did wrong is on them. And then everything that they did right was on us, not just us as, you know, coaches, but us, the client coach combo. And I think that that's sometimes, like I said, it disempowers them and it makes them feel like in order to continue to do right, they have to be with us all the time. And that's not right. Like, we know that that's not true. And so we want to be sure that we're careful about how we think about that and how we talk about it. But it's also one of the things that I tell people right away is that I don't know more about you than you know about you. That's so important for me to just lay out in the beginning, because people will think, well, they're coming to me for answers. And I'm like, you know, I mean, you can come to me for reflection, you can come to me for guidance, but I don't have the answers. My job is to pull them out of you. And people are funny. They're like, well, you've got to have other wisdom or other pieces of information. Well, I do have pieces of information that might be good for you, but those aren't necessarily your answers. And I can't pretend to know more about you than you know about yourself. And so I think sometimes just putting it out there right in the beginning is one way that it can hold us accountable, but also maybe if we put it there for them, then if we kind of leak in some of that sort of verbiage, they can go, oh, nope, that one was me. Nice try, coach, but I'm the one who did that. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's a really good point. And I think, again, I just want to reiterate, it's something that is very, very easy for us as coaches
to slip
do,
into,
to take credit for the wins and to, push away from the losses kind of thing. And that's something that, the more you coach, the longer you coach, the more people that you help, you'll get better and better with. But it's a conscious effort. It's not something that I would imagine that for someone to be completely free of this, it'd probably take a long time. A long time.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is definitely like what I would call like a perishable skill, to where like if you're not consistently putting intention behind the words that you choose to say and also the way that you choose to think about things, you'll lose it. It's the old adage, if you don't use it, you'll lose it, kind of thing.
Great point. Something else that kind of just creeped up for me as you were talking is when we're talking about like something that happens to them. So let's just go back to your example, right? The whole thing with Aiden.
Yeah.
I know his last name. Okay, Hutch. We're going to go with Hutch.
Yeah, Hutch.
The whole thing that happened with Hutch, it's easy for you to go, that happened to us, right? I mean, there is some truth to that. It happened to the team. It happened to like versions of it happened to the fans. Version of it happened to the NFL in general, because it will shift the way that things go forward. Right? I'm guessing. Again, I know nothing about football, but I'm guessing that it would shift that. Okay, perfect. But at the same time, it happened to Hutch on a much bigger scale. Yeah. Much, much bigger scale. Yeah. It's something that it might shift the way things go for everybody else, but it's going to be a pretty quick pivot, I think, for most people. They're going to figure out a way to, do something differently with the team. They're going to figure out a way to change up their fantasy football teams, like the rosters. Like there's going to be just a quick pivot that's going to happen for you. For him, we're talking a long recovery time. And so I think that that's the other piece of this that I would really like to talk about. Yes, I want to make sure we talk about the devastation part of it. But when we do that, let's also remember who that devastation is happening to and who the real, I'm going to use the word victim. I don't like that word, but who the real recipient of that devastation is in any given situation. So I would like, do you have any, just like very concrete examples of someone that you've worked with recently that maybe they were clipping along and things were going really well, and then something just bam, hit them almost like Hutch's leg?
Yeah. Recently I'm working with a couple right now, and, when we first started, they were in a pretty rough situation, to the point to where we started with them like in a deficit. Even after we went through and we, did their audit and stuff like that, we were finding things as best as we could, and we were still in a deficit. So we had to get more creative about like, how do we bring in more income? How do we, free up more income? All these different types of things. We got them out of a deficit, and then in the months following, they were paying off their debts left and right. Now, the good news is like, I teach the debt snowball method. They were paying off some smaller ones, like $100 here, $300 there, $500 there, but they were paying them off, a lot of them very quickly, because they were smaller amounts. So they were feeling that traction, and they were finally starting to get that kind of steam ahead of them, to where they were starting to pay off, the $1,000 ones, the $2,000 ones, and so on and so forth. And we were really making good progress. But then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the husband got fired from his job. And you want to talk about devastation, right as we were just starting to not just feel, but also see the work that they had been putting in come to fruition, and then that hits. It affected them quite a bit.
So basically, top of the third quarter.
Yeah, exactly.
This happens to them.
Yep.
Okay. Well, good. So not good for them, but good that you have a very concrete example, because I think that is something that we can absolutely use here. So with that example, What did you see happening in their minds before we get into what your mind as the coach was? What was going on for them emotionally, mentally, physically, maybe financially?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is this, is I didn't even find out about this person losing their job because they reached out to me and they told me. I actually found out because they posted about it on Facebook.
Mm.
And then it was probably 10 minutes after they posted it, I saw it and I reached out to them. And I said, oh, go ahead.
So I was just going to ask, was that immediately after the job loss, or was it sometime? It was immediate. Okay.
It was immediate. Yep. So what I ended up doing is I saw that post and immediately I sent this guy a text and I said, hey, just saw your post. Do you have time for a quick call? And he said, yes. So, of course he said yes. He's not working. So I called him.
He could have been looking for work. You don't know.
Yeah. No, I called him and right away he was like, I was going to tell you, but I just felt like I needed to vent a little bit, and I threw up on Facebook and I was like, yeah, like no big deal, dude. But I called him not because I wanted to, solve his problem or anything like that, or give him any sort of suggestions or anything like that. I just wanted to call him and ask him how he was doing. That's all. That's the first thing I wanted to do. And that's what I told him too. And he was like, dude, I just really appreciate that because like I really needed this right now. And in that moment, like, yeah, he was pissed off. He was confused. He didn't understand as to why it happened. And he was devastated. It was one of those things where like he said to me, like, we were just really starting to see this thing take form. And then this happens. And now I don't even know like how long it's going to be before I get another job. It could be a week. It could be a month. It could be several months. I don't know what I'm going to do. Like all different types of things. Right. So mentally he was not well. Emotionally, he was not well. But he just needed someone to be there for him, and that's why I called him. And it was just there to just listen to him, allow him to vent and to support him, and, after we kind of like had that conversation and we got things into like a place to where we felt like we allowed him to, get everything off of his chest. At that point, that's when I said, all right, so here's what we do from here, and I gave him a few pointers as far as like, what to do immediately in that day for like his mental and emotional health. I talked to him about how, maybe some things that he could do with his wife to help with those things too. But then we also talked about next steps, like how do we move forward from this, and like, what do we do to find a new job? How do we go about this? Like what kind of job are we really looking for? Do we sign up for unemployment in the meantime? All these different types of things. And by the end of that call, it was probably like a 25-minute call, maybe 30 minutes. He was feeling a lot better. And I can tell you that it only took him 3 weeks to find a job.
That's incredible. So when you were talking to him about that, it sounds like he was able to recognize that they had made a lot of progress.
Yes.
And yet it was difficult for him to enjoy that in the moment because of the devastation. Okay. Yep. So I'm just curious. You probably did this, but since you didn't mention it, I'm going to bring it up. You mentioned that you used the snowball method and that they had paid off several of their little debts. And it's very easy sometimes to not think that that's a really big deal. And also to forget that we had that when we have this devastation. And I will tell you that there was a time when my husband and I also were using the snowball method, and my husband also lost his job. I think we had 2 kids at the time, and it sounds very similar to the situation you just said. We were kind of clipping along, and then bam, like it felt like it came out of nowhere. And one of the things, because I'm the one who was working, like doing all of the actual paperwork with all of that, not just the snowball stuff, but also figuring out what do we apply for and all that. But I tell you what I noticed is that our cash flow was completely different because we didn't have all of those minimum payments that were due. So even though they were many smaller amounts, we didn't have all these extra payments that needed to go. So when we had to figure out how to live on a little bit less, it was a little bit easier to still make the payments that were due because we didn't have all of these extra little ones on top of it. So I just want to say it was our own little like consolidation approach, even though it wasn't really consolidating anything, and that the cash flow was a lot easier at the time. So I'm curious to know, did you help him recognize that in the moment? You're nodding yes. And I figured you probably had, but I wanted our coaches to hear it as well.
Yeah, that's a part of it, because when he started talking about, them getting that traction and finally starting to see something work, and then it gets essentially taken away from him. That's what he said.
Yeah.
It was at that point where I was like, well, dude, think about it this way. Think about if you hadn't put in the work that you did over these last several months, and you hadn't paid off the debt that you did pay off, and you hadn't freed up those payments that you did free up, and this still happened, how much different would you be feeling right now? Not only feeling, but how much different would it actually be? And he was like, oh, it would be a disaster. And I'm like, yeah, dude, it would be a completely different situation. But because of the stuff that you had done up until this point, because of the things that you had accomplished, and because of the things that we had been able to clean up, yeah, this still sucks, but it's not a death sentence. You're going to be okay over these next few weeks and or months as you find a new job. And here's why you're going to be okay. And here's the facts behind you're going to be okay. And here's the numbers that show as to why you're going to be okay. So lay that piece of it down, because you're not going to, end up homeless or anything like that. You're going to be fine. But with that being said, don't just hear me say that and not put your best foot forward for finding something new, because you still need to do that,
Yeah.
And he, after we kind of talked about that, he was like, yeah, I can understand that. And I understand the fact that things aren't as doom and gloom as I maybe feel right now. But I also understand that I need to kind of have that mindset of hey, even if it's not doom and gloom, I still need to get after it.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's really important.
Yeah. Well, not only is it important, but I think it also, when we are stuck in doom and gloom, we have a hard time putting our best foot forward. And so because he wasn't stuck there, it probably led to the quicker recovery in him getting in that job within 3 weeks. I think the other thing that it's another parallel that it just came to mind. So I'm going to throw it out there, and then we can probably wrap up. But it's that whole idea of how we treat ourselves prior to an injury. So Hutch, let's just say, was never exercising. Chances are he wouldn't be a pro football player if he had done this, right? But if you're not eating right, you're not exercising, you're not taking care of your body, when you have an injury like that, the chances of recovering quickly are going to be nil. You're not going to recover. And even if you do all of those things, it will still take some time to recover, but your body will be much more well suited to do that for you. And the same thing happened with your client, and it happens with our listeners' clients as well. If they are putting their best foot forward while things are going well, they're taking care of their financial stuff, they're paying off some of those little ones so that they can make sure they get their cash flow in order, they're making sure they have some money set aside in the hopefully unlikely event, but possible event that they lose a job, something like that. They're able to put themselves into a mental state and into a financial state that's so much healthier, that will allow that healing process to happen so much more quickly for them than if they had just kind of thrown caution to the wind and said, you know what, I can't control whether or not I lose a job, so we might as well just not even worry about it. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense because like you mentioned, if you're not taking care of yourself initially and then something happens, the rate of recovery way longer.
Right.
Way longer. So, and that's just a testament of why the work that we do as financial coaches is so important, because we get people into that mode, into that new habit, that new consistency of taking care of themselves financially, so that if and when something does happen, they have a quicker recovery period, you know? Right. And I think that that's what's shown with this guy in particular. You know, it could have been a month, it could have been 2 months before he found a new job. And we know of many people who, you know, have a layoff in between jobs that's a longer period. But for him, it was only 3 weeks. And you got to think about like how quick that went. Like, you have to go through the process of finding jobs that are trying to hire, submitting the applications, having the interview, having the secondary interview, so on and so forth, going through the hiring process, and then actually starting the job. All of that happened within 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I can tell you that with my husband, it took much longer than 3 weeks. I think it was like closer to 2 or 3 months, I want to say.
That's what I'm talking about, yeah.
Yeah, but I will also say this, that it was nothing for a while. And then when it came down to it, he had like 2 or 3 to choose from. And what we had done for ourselves prior to any of that happening was understanding what is important to us. We had gotten ourselves enough of a cushion where it bought him some of that time. His was a layoff, by the way, it wasn't a fire. And so we had some severance packages in there. So that helped for that month and a half. But it allowed for him to make the decision as to which job he would take, which one was he more well suited for, which one was more aligned with his values, which one, and it didn't have to be pay. In fact, he took the one with a little bit less pay. But it ended up being the one that he kept for 7 years. And so I just think that if people can slow down and, you know, really look at what they've already put in place for themselves, if they've taken care of themselves well up until that point, it does give them more of that leeway. And then that healing, like we said, would be much faster. And the ripple effect will be not as devastating, even for the person it happened directly to, forgetting the people who are watching and owning all of that. Well, Cody, I just want to say thanks so much for highlighting the fact that I know nothing about sports. That's always fun when I'm
a problem.
When I'm highlighted on here as being the idiot. That's always great. But if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, there was a Star Wars and Star Trek episode. Gosh, that was probably like 2 years ago now, huh?
That was
something like that.
Ago.
Anyway, Cody totally roasted me on it because I knew nothing what I was talking about. But thanks for bringing that up again. And also for knowing that we were going to find a way to draw this, just draw parallels to it, so that our listeners could definitely gain some wisdom. And I think that we did just that today.
Yeah, I agree. And it just goes to show, like, football is the one thing in life that you can draw parallels to in every way. So I'll end the episode with saying this: prayers up to Hutch, prayers up to 97. And, thanks again for listening today, and we'll catch you next week for another episode of the Financial Coaches Podcast. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Financial Coaches Podcast, brought to you by New Money Habits and Sizemore Financial Coaching. Submit your questions to our hosts by emailing podcast@newmoneyhabits.com. Be sure to subscribe to be notified of future episodes and join our growing group of like-minded coaches on Facebook. And until next time, happy coaching. Music provided by Summer School.